Yeah, here we are because of population growth through time. A census, which of course the United States takes every 10 years, is the attempt, usually by a government, to count the population for the purpose of taxation, representation, and apportionment of revenue. Why do I mention a census at all? Because throughout most of human history, people were not taking a census. The earliest census data that we're aware of, at least, comes from the Middle East and China, and this is from about 4,000 years or so ago. The Romans began conducting a census about 2,600 years ago, and of course conducted one of the most famous censuses ever about 2,000 years ago, the one that counted Jesus. Human populations prior to 10,000 years ago vacillated from about 1 to 10 million people, and I mean across the entire planet. So there were times when there might have only been about a million of us wandering around. And it changed depending on disease, famine, access. All of these things would result in the population going up or down depending on what was happening at the time. People back then were hunters and gatherers, or hunter-gatherers as some people like to call them. That is exactly what it sounds like it means. They hunted for wild food, animals, and then they gathered wild food, whatever grew naturally. Population began to change dramatically about 10,000 years ago. Three major periods of population growth have happened over the last 10 or so thousand years. The agricultural revolution, the industrial revolution, and the medical revolution. These are my topics right now. The agricultural revolution began something like between 10 and 14,000 years ago, most people would agree. It was a result of the domestication of plants and animals. In other words, people began to figure out how to grow things for their own purposes and domesticated certain animals for their own purposes, rather than these things just simply being wild. It likely started in Mesopotamia and the Fertile Crescent, two areas you almost certainly have heard of. Take a look at this map. I just circled Mesopotamia for you. The word Mesopotamia literally means land between the rivers. Do you know which rivers? The Euphrates and the Tigris, correct. So this is in modern day Iraq. And you can see I highlighted the Euphrates in the dark blue and the Tigris in the light blue. Now, there were some very famous cities as this began to progress in that area. Nineveh, Babylon, Uruk, highlighted by the arrows. The term Fertile Crescent means exactly what it sounds like it means. It's crescent-shaped, or shaped like a croissant, and it was an area of historical agriculture going back thousands and thousands of years. The eastern part was Mesopotamia, the net swung up through southern Turkey down along the Levant, or the eastern part of the Mediterranean, and into the Nile River Valley. Several other places around the same time, or within a couple, 3,000 or so years, also began to develop agriculture. In some cases, they had contact with each other. In other cases, this just happened organically. In Egypt, the Indus River Valley, which is in modern-day Pakistan, the Huanghe River Valley, which is in China, the Niger River Valley, which is in Western Africa. Do you sense a trend here? Ethiopia, the Mekong River Delta, which is in Southeast Asia and southern Vietnam, the Gulf Coast of Mesoamerica and central Mesoamerica, and the Central Andes. Then the products that came from those areas and the agricultural know-how diffused throughout large parts of the world. If you take a quick look at this map, you can see in the blue the major original agricultural hearths. But there were lots of other smaller places where things were being developed as well. So what did the agricultural revolution do? Well, provided more stable food sources, and that resulted in the growth of cities and complex societies. Trade networks grew. Hunter-gatherers declined, of course. But water purity, famine, disease, these things all still persisted. And population grew to around 850 million by 1750. So let's assume that 10,000 years ago there were about 10 million people. Over the next nearly 10,000 years, the population went up to 850 million people. The Industrial Revolution begins in the 1750s in England and really is ongoing. If you have a cell phone, this is part of the Industrial Revolution, and has resulted in an increase in manufacturing and transportation technology. It spread from England to mainland Europe, at least at first, and then into British-influenced areas like the United States. And Japan, Japan is an island country. They emulated the British because the British were also an island country, and then throughout the rest of the world. If you take a look at the top map, you can see the way the spread went from England into Western Europe, and then you can see that it also spread throughout the world to these major areas first, and then throughout the rest of the world afterwards. During the Industrial Revolution, of course, what happened was factories were built and people began to work in factories. Now, factories back then were very polluting. They still are in some places in the world today, but every place that had a factory back in the 1800s and early 1900s, it was a very polluting area. But the Industrial Revolution resulted in better farming technology, more efficient agriculture, increased food production, greater variety of food through quicker transportation, decreased spoilage. In England, the enclosure program, and I mentioned this, and you'll see why in a moment, the enclosure program consolidated small family farms into larger, more efficient farms, but that displaced the farmers, and they had to go someplace, and of course, they went into the cities. And as a result of that, urban populations began to grow. In 1776, at the time of the American Revolution, the population in the 13 colonies was 90% agricultural. Today, in the United States, we're 2 to 3% agricultural, engaged in farming. So it's had a complete flip occur as a result of the Industrial Revolution, where people went from being overwhelmingly agricultural to overwhelmingly urban. And of course, as the cities grew, people got compacted into these cities, and then the edges of the cities grew outwards further and further. That resulted in conurbation. This is the grouping together of cities due to massive urban growth. If you recall, you probably saw this picture in an earlier video of Los Angeles. Well, Los Angeles is spread out and consumed all of the flat land. Much of that was agricultural land at one point. Many problems, though, continue to exist as the Industrial Revolution progressed. Water purity issues persisted, industrial pollution began to happen, growing populations made inequality of wealth, education, access to social advancement more apparent, and populations grew from about 850 million in 1750 to about 2.5 billion by 1950. The medical revolution began about 1950 in the United States and Europe, and is also ongoing. And it brought improved medical practices, medicines, widespread development and use of vaccines, along with greater understanding and elimination of many diseases. Because of technology related to the Industrial Revolution, these advances spread rapidly throughout the world. Life expectancy increased almost everywhere in the world, and infant mortality almost everywhere decreased. Remember, crude death rate and crude birth rate are critical to natural increase rate. If more people are being born than die, population goes up. If more people are dying than are born, population goes down. Well, what did this result in? Longer life expectancies, so more people staying on the planet, and younger people not dying. Back in the past, it was common that children died. Population grew from about 2.5 billion in 1950 to around 8 billion today. What about this thing called the technological revolution? Are we in the midst of another revolution today? What will the impacts be on society? What about on population? Will it go up, down, stay the same? How about the distribution of resources and access to technology that improves the quality of life? What about pollution? What's going to happen as a result of that? Will it increase or decrease equality? What about governing systems? Are they going to be more responsive or less responsive? How about access to healthcare? What's going to happen as a result of this technological revolution if indeed we are in that today?